My name is Leona. Standing in the nearly empty community hall, the soft echo of the closing doors still ringing in my ears, I'm overwhelmed by a mix of exhaustion and a strange sense of clarity. My son, Ryan, and his wife, Olivia, just left my wedding reception after I asked them to go. The pain of that moment is still fresh, but it's also a turning point I didn't see coming. As I look back, I remember the day I met my first husband, Carl. We were young, full of dreams, and deeply in love. We built a life together, and when Ryan was born, it felt like our family was complete. But then, Carl passed away suddenly. It was a blow that I never fully recovered from. The next 15 years were a blur. I worked as a nurse at the local hospital, coming home to an empty house every night. I cooked for one, slept alone, and my world gradually shrank. I raised Ryan the best I could. I was there for his school events, paid his tuition fees, and listened to his problems. But as he grew older, he became more distant. When he met Olivia and got married, my place in his life became even smaller. I learned to accept it, thinking that this was just part of growing up. Then, I met Henry. We crossed paths at a community garden project. He was a quiet man, with a gentle smile and a kind heart. He listened to me talk about my life, my work, and my son, without interrupting. It was a refreshing change. We started spending more time together, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. I didn't rush to tell Ryan about Henry. I wanted to be sure that this was real, that it wasn't just a way to fill the void in my life. When I finally did tell him, his reaction was polite but cold. He asked about Henry's age, his job, and where he lived, but he never asked how I felt about him. The first time Ryan and Olivia met Henry, I could see the judgment in their eyes. Ryan scanned Henry's old but well-maintained clothes, and Olivia asked questions about his finances. Henry answered calmly, never giving more than necessary. When Henry proposed, I said yes without hesitation. I felt respected and valued for the first time in a long while. We decided on a small wedding at a modest community center. I wanted to pay for it myself, to avoid any misunderstandings. I invited old colleagues from the hospital, neighbors who had supported me after Carl's death, people who knew me and still cared. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early. I watched the staff set up the tables and chairs, and I noticed how carefully they handled the decorations. Henry arrived shortly after, wearing his usual suit, neatly pressed. When he saw me, he smiled with a quiet warmth that made my heart skip a beat. Ryan and Olivia arrived late. Ryan gave me a quick hug, looking distracted, and Olivia scanned the room, adjusting her dress and checking her phone. I chose to ignore their behavior, telling myself that this was a day of joy. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. As Henry looked into my eyes and spoke his vows, I felt a sense of peace and belonging. But then, during the reception, everything changed. I noticed Ryan leaning towards Olivia. Their heads were close together, and they were whispering and smiling in a way that made me uneasy. I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, I heard the laugh. It was sharp and mocking, cutting through the music and conversations. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. When I did, I saw Ryan leaning back in his chair, laughing, and Olivia was filming with her phone. They were laughing at Henry. Henry stood a few feet away, talking to an old friend. His suit was clean but not new, and his shoes showed signs of wear. He looked like a man who lived a simple, honest life, and that seemed to be the source of their amusement. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. I had always told myself that I didn't need Ryan's approval, but in that moment, I felt exposed. Henry glanced at me, concern in his eyes, but I gave him a small shake of my head, signaling that I would handle it. I walked over to Ryan and Olivia. Ryan looked up, a smirk on his face. "Mom, what's going on?" "We're just joking," he said. "Joking? Is this how you show respect for the man I love?" I said, my voice steady. I reminded Ryan of all the sacrifices I had made for him over the years. I told him about the double shifts I worked to pay his tuition, the times I was there for him when he needed me. And I reminded him of the time I was sick and he offered me help with conditions. Ryan's face turned red with anger. "You're embarrassing me," he hissed. "I'm not embarrassing you, Ryan. You're embarrassing yourself. This is my wedding, and you don't get to mock the person I love," I said firmly. I then asked him and Olivia to leave. Ryan stared at me in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe I was setting boundaries. A security guard approached, and I repeated my request. Ryan protested, but no one in the room supported him. After they left, the atmosphere in the room was heavy. The music continued, but it sounded distant. I felt my legs weaken, and Henry reached out to hold my hand. His touch was a source of strength. I excused myself and went to a small room behind the hall. Sitting there alone, I realized that this moment had been building up for years. Ryan's distant behavior, his lack of respect, it had all been leading to this. I had allowed it to happen because I thought peace was more important than honesty. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Henry. He sat beside me, giving me space. "This was your moment," he said gently. I thanked him for letting me handle it. We returned to the reception. People watched us with concern, but I decided not to let Ryan's behavior ruin the rest of the night. We danced slowly, and I felt the support of those who had stayed. Later, when most of the guests had left, Henry and I sat at a quiet table. He told me about his family, his past business, and why he chose a simple life. It wasn't to impress me, but to share a part of himself that he had never emphasized before. The next morning, I woke up expecting a call from Ryan. But it never came. Instead, I received a message asking if I could convince Henry to help him with a financial problem. The message was cold and practical, with no mention of the wedding or the hurt he had caused. In the past, I would have jumped at the chance to help him. But this time, I set my phone down and walked away. Henry didn't ask me what the message said. He trusted me to make the right decision. Over the next few days, more messages arrived. Ryan's tone became more frustrated, but he still never apologized. I realized that what hurt the most was his assumption that I would always be there to bail him out, regardless of how he treated me. When I finally replied, I told him that I cared about his well-being, but I couldn't offer him financial help anymore. I was willing to talk and support him in other ways, but I needed him to respect my choices. Weeks later, Ryan asked to meet. We sat in a quiet cafe. He looked tired and older than I remembered. He didn't apologize right away. He talked about his stress and the mistakes he had made. When he finally looked up, he said, "I didn't think you'd actually make me leave." That's when I knew that his shock wasn't from guilt, but from the fact that I had finally drawn a boundary. I told him that love didn't mean tolerating disrespect. I wasn't asking for his approval, just for him to treat my choices with dignity. He nodded slowly, in acknowledgement. In the months that followed, Ryan's behavior changed gradually. He spoke less about money and more about responsibility. I didn't rush to reward his change. I let it develop at its own pace. Henry remained a steady presence in my life, never interfering in my relationship with Ryan. As I sit on the porch now, watching the sunset, I realize that the wedding wasn't the turning point. It was my decision to stop chasing Ryan's approval. Family is not built on endurance alone. It's built on honesty and respect. Standing up for myself didn't make me a bad mother. It made me a whole person. I don't know what the future holds for Ryan and me, but I'm ready to face it with the newfound strength and clarity.